Deception appears to be the only characteristic that this world knows, and the prime target of these deceivers are Christians. It's time to gear up, folks. The spiritual battle is on. I am not joking when I tell you this. The doors are beginning to open for your involvement in ways that it has never opened before in human history. Do you understand that? You folks, all of us together are living in the greatest time in human history to be alive. I would dare venture to say a greater time than the beginning of creation. I dare venture to say even a greater time than the time that Christ was walking on this earth. We are living in the most extraordinary time in human history because we are getting to the end of it all. We are getting to the culmination of where everything we know is going and supposed to go, and God saw us fit as a group of people to be able to live through and experience all that we know is waiting for us. And folks, what comes with that is a responsibility. What comes with that is an obligation. What comes with that is an understanding that we are called by God to make a substantial difference in a way that we never thought that we actually could. I think perhaps one of the greatest and most powerful, effective tools of the enemy in this current moment is to get you to think that things are so insurmountable right now that you are incapable of doing anything as an individual. Folks, I want to break it to you, and I know that this might sound harsh to all of you. It sounds harsh to me every time I remind myself, but it is perhaps the greatest source of hope that I can find from within the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. Here it is. Ready? There is nothing you can do as an individual or collectively, as a group, to change anything in this world, but we worship a God that can. We worship a God that can change anything that he wants to change, and guess what, folks? He chooses to use us as a tool. And perhaps the most significant and powerful aspect that comes with being used by God as a tool to effect his purposes centers around the idea that God does not honor your capabilities. God honors your ability to obey him. I have been reminded in a very vivid way of how important it is to be a person who listens to wise counsel and listens to godly counsel, because in doing so, you affect a pattern of obedience, and that obedience might not make sense in the overall picture for the accomplishments by which you may set forth to be able to complete. But it makes perfect sense in the overall picture that is created through the lens of the eyes of God, who understands the beginning from the end. And perhaps one of the most powerful and significant aspects of the relationship that God has given us to have an experience with him is that he not only does all the work for us, he gives us the strength to walk in obedience to the very things that he has actually given us. And perhaps the more significant variable that exists behind all of these matters is the fact that God honors our obedience, not what we perceive as being the results that are necessary in order to create a successful kind of a end. Success is not defined by what you can accomplish. Success is defined by what you choose to do when you say, God, I will obey you and I will walk according to the purposes and the plans that you have put in front of me. And I think that there is not enough time that is spent by people who are teaching the word to remind everybody of the call that God has placed upon our life to be obedient. Perhaps the weakest aspect of this that people oftentimes bring up, and it is indeed a weak aspect, is when men hide behind the message that says the only thing I'm going to do is preach the gospel, when in reality, preaching the gospel is the most basic and fundamental part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. When a man comes to me and a man tells me, my job is just to preach the gospel. When I hear a pastor come to me and say, my job is just to preach the gospel, you know what it sounds like to me? Let me give you another demonstration of what that sounds like to me. This is what I hear. I go to a person and I say, let's go do something exciting today. Let's go and see if we can talk to some people or help somebody in the community regarding this, or let's go see if we can make a difference in a small area of our life at this current moment. Because God calls us to be people like that. And then you come back to me and you say, look, James, I'm not interested in doing all of that stuff because I'm not called to do any of that stuff. The only thing I'm called to do is to breathe and to eat and to poop. That's what I'm called to do. I'm called to inhale and exhale. That's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to focus on inhaling and exhaling, and that's it. Just breathing in regular air and literally breathing out carbon dioxide. That's what I'm going to do. When a person comes to me and says, all I do and all I'm going to focus on is preaching the gospel, and that's what they hide behind, it's like you coming to me and saying, all I'm going to do is breathe in and breathe out every day. You preaching the gospel should be as involuntary to you and as regular to you as breathing in air and breathing out air. I shouldn't have to talk to you about preaching the gospel, because preaching the gospel should be a part of your everyday function. It should be part of what you normally do in every moment being presented to you. Preaching the gospel should be the utmost basic. It's the most basic portion of what you do as a believer. So to come to another person and say, well, all I am is about preaching the gospel, well, that doesn't make sense. You know, I have had some very misguided people come up to me, mostly pastors, by the way, come up to me and say, well, what do you do when you look at the Apostle Paul saying something like, I preach Christ and him crucified? I tell them the same thing every single time. I say, look at the context of the discussion that's being had in the moment. Look at the discussion that's being had, and the discussion that's being had in the current moment where the Apostle Paul makes such a statement is from within the context of him fighting the governmental powers that existed that were seeking to keep his voice from being heard amongst the Gentiles. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that was the Apostle Paul asserting his rights. That was the Apostle Paul choosing to say, I am going to use everything available to me within the confines of every single place in which God has given me to do what God has called me to do. This is exactly why I think it's critically important for us that have been given influencer status, as we would call it, to utilize every tool that God has given available to us. And this is why we make investments in our studio. This is why we spend a lot of time working with trying to understand the YouTube algorithms and understanding how the Rumble infrastructure works and understanding how our social media areas work. This is precisely the reason why we go out of our way to make sure that all the things we communicate on a daily basis are being communicated effectively under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, utilizing every single tool that's being given to us. And yes, we not only should be demanding our rights, we should be contending for them, because there will come a point in time, if we do not speak up concerning our rights, that those people will take away the very right that we have to preach the gospel. And that is not acceptable in any context. Folks, in case you have not been paying attention and in case you have not noticed, they are now seeking to file a motion where they are going to ask that the President of the United States be given a gag order. And I'm not talking about the current president. I'm talking about the former president of the United States who is running to become president again. They are going to very likely use the justice system to order him to shut his mouth during the time where he should be opening his mouth the most. We have never in the history of this nation watched a totalitarian government utilize its law enforcement arm and its activist judicial arm to work together in seeking to shut the mouth up of a political dissenter. By the way, when you stop to examine what happened on that fateful day in January, you will realize that there are a lot of really good men right now that are facing tremendous amounts of prison time. Tremendous amounts, because of a totalitarian government whose mindset, communication variables cannot stand up for anything of any type of remote value whatsoever. In other words, their ideas are stupid. Their ideas always will be stupid. And they're destructive. And anybody who takes the time to listen to the functional articulation of any of those ideas will recognize in 1 second, literally in 1 second, how destructive they are. Folks, we are not talking about economic Marxists here. We are talking about cultural Marxists. We are not talking about the type of people who are simply looking to make a better life, utilizing a specific political model and testing a certain level of disagreement amongst a series of political opponents in a different party that seems to be opposing one another. What we are looking at is an active elimination of truth. We are looking at men and women who are saying that the most euphoric value you can find is the coexistence of two truths, which means there will be no truth ever to be established. It is absolutely disgusting. It is based on the mindset that continues to say that the best place we can find ourselves in is the place where we have no definitive values. And if there are no definitive values, then we can find ourselves in a place where we can question anything we want and literally do anything we want. Folks, they have gotten to the point where they are even doing this with things that have solid epistemologies tied to them. Understand this. They are beginning to approach these issues as related to, and I want people to understand this, they are beginning to approach these issues with a mindset and a series of circumstances that involve completely eliminating every last bit of objectivity. Because if they can get rid of every last bit of objectivity, then they literally take away the people's ability to debate on what we understand and know to be a gold standard of truth that is objective. Where there are any variables that exist, they exist only for the purpose of application within a series of confines to keep yourself from falling off the rails. When you're driving down the road, let me give you an illustration of this principle that I'm talking about. When you're driving down the road, there are rules of the road. You drive on the right side of the street in the direction in which you're going, depending on where you're going. You always do that. You're going east, you drive on the right side of the street. You're going west, you drive on the right side of the street. You're not in Europe. You're in the United States of America. And you follow traffic signals. If there's a red light, you stop. If there's a yellow light, if you can, you stop. If there's a green light, you go. There are speed limits that we give to people. We tell these people that these are rules that we cannot break. And every single day that I drive my vehicle, there are definitive rules that I cannot break, because if I break them, I will destroy life and property. There are certain lines that I have to follow. When I ride my bike every single day to exercise and I'm traveling down the street, I have to rely, as the most vulnerable person on the road in that moment, on the fact that the other people on the road are going to obey and listen to the traffic rules. Those rules are definitive. Those rules are objective. Those rules cannot be broken. But there is a very liberal application that you can apply to those rules, in the sense that those rules might tell me how to act on the road, but they don't tell me what direction I should be going in. In other words, one person might be on the road going to their house. Another person might be on the road going to work. Another person might be on the road going for a leisure cruise. One person on the road might be going down the road simply because they want to go get something to eat. There is a series of definitive and objective laws that they have to follow that opens up the door for the freedom that they have to be able to travel anywhere they want. If I do not put into place those objective values, those definitive rules that are based on a standard of truth, then everybody dies going to the location that they're actually going to. People, do we understand this principle? The idea that these leftists are seeking to deploy is they are wanting to completely get rid of every single direction on the road. They want to get rid of every tool that is designed to keep everybody safe. And then tell everybody this is a free-for-all. Go do whatever you want to do. Folks, you know that we have a problem in a society that refers to mathematics as white imperialism. You know that we have a serious problem in a society that says that you cannot look at something definitive as XX or XY and make a decision based on a function of real biology. Think about that for just 1 second. So let's circle back to the original statement about preaching the gospel. Look, here's the thing. As I said before, if the core of me is represented by the call that God has placed upon my life to preach the gospel, then what about the application of the gospel, right? In the world that I just described to you, how in the world can we be believers and actually say we're not going to apply the biblical worldview in the world in which we live? I mean, think about this, folks. Look, I have to tell you this. This is not me preaching at you. This is us having a conversation, because we are in this battle together. Understand this. More than ever in today's world, as we are experiencing the birth pangs to the second coming of Christ, in a world today that is literally falling apart, the only gatekeepers around are going to be the believers. So yes, breathing, eating, drinking, that's the gospel, okay? I eat, breathe, drink, that's just breathing in and out. It's involuntary. It's what we do. But how do we apply the message of the gospel in everyday life? How do we approach the political infrastructure? How do we approach what's going on in popular culture and unpopular culture? What are we doing in this particular world and community to be able to say we are standing up for the principles that God has called us to stand up for, and we are going to fight the forces of evil because the battle is spiritual? Let me say that again. The battle is spiritual. The battle is spiritual. Folks, the spiritual fight is on. Plain and simple.